I'm Neil Dubord, Chief of the Delta Police Department. This week on our show,
I observed an altercation where a male was assaulting a female with a knife. Made the decision to intervene. I was stabbed a number of times while intervening, and luckily I was able to disarm the male and hold him until uniformed members came.
Bend, don't break. This is a Delta Police podcast.
Hear more about how police officers strengthen their resiliency through the power of story.
John, I've been waiting for us to be able to talk and to be able to go through sort of some of the different stressors in your life that you've come through. And I know that you've had a number of different challenges over the course of your career and certainly leading up to a big event that we're going to talk about later today. So first of all, thank you very much for being here. I know that these events happened a month ago and they're still probably fairly raw, the latest one, and we'll get to that one as we go through the podcast. But we appreciate you being here. And by the way, you look great. So
thank you very much for inviting me.
You're obviously recovering very well. So the purpose of our podcast is to be able to make sure that we talk about these traumatic incidents that police officers or first responders go through and really how they learn from them and what they do to be able to overcome some of those stressors and get back to a normal routine and normal working life and really how they create resilience, strength, and wisdom from these traumatic incidents. So that's what I hope to be able to get to today. And I know that you've got some great stories to be able to share with us. But first of all, I think it's important for us to be able to talk about what did you do this morning when you woke up? What did you have for breakfast?
I don't eat breakfast till 10:30 because I do intermittent fasting. But other than that, I took my kids to school. After that, I went to physio. After that, I went to the gym, went home, had breakfast, and studied a bit, and then came here.
And your intermittent fasting, I know that's the latest rage. That's all you hear about now on other podcasts and other health channels. Tell me about that. How does it make you feel?
You know what? I don't drink coffee or anything like that, so I feel fairly clear-headed. It just works out better with my schedule. So
you're killing me. No coffee. That's not going to work for me. So I guess I'll never be an intermittent faster. John, tell me a little bit about your career, and I want to hear about the time that sort of you're working towards a goal of yours, and that's getting to the CFSU, the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit, gang unit, in the integrated team that we have here in the Lower Mainland. And tell me a little bit about that and how you're working towards that goal and what happens.
So I've been on about 13 years. Fortunately, I had some opportunities early on in my career where I was given these opportunities. I guess about 2008, 2009 is when we were having a bit of a gang war in the Lower Mainland between the Red Scorpions and the UN gang. They created the Uniform Gang Task Force. Back then they called it the Violence Suppression Team. It was integrated, run out of Vancouver's department at Cambie Street there, but it was RCMP, all the municipal forces. They would send bodies there for a period of time. After a couple of rotations, I was given the opportunity to go and represent the department there. And actually, it was my very first day. I was going to attend a call that was of great importance. Basically, we had information that there was going to be a shooting. We were going code on Knight Street towards the briefing for this incident, and we were struck in our unmarked police vehicle. We were T-boned about 80, 90K into the side of my door. We were hit pretty hard. It shattered my door. The only thing that saved me was the fact that we had a roll bar. It caved in my door. It actually shattered my holster. And for about a period of 30 seconds, I couldn't feel my legs. Looked over at Phil. Phil looked panicked. He came to try and get me out of the car. Him and some bystanders in the intersection were trying to open the door, but it was so crushed. During that period of time, I had significant concern because a few weeks prior, we had an incident in Delta while I was working where a car had gone off the road. It had gone down a ravine. The driver was ejected, and there was a passenger stuck inside down at the bottom of the ravine when the car caught fire. The members on scene that were on my shift were advising that they can hear screaming from the car, help me, I'm burning. And then the car exploded, and then they couldn't hear anything else. I was tasked with doing the NOK for that, but that's kind of what was in my head. I could feel like the car's smoking. I can't feel my legs. I need to get out of this car. I don't want it to catch fire. So I crawled through the window and kind of dragged myself off to the corner and then just waited for an ambulance. So.
And you had sort of one other police officer with you at that time.
Yes.
And tell me sort of what happened from there. So obviously emergency services is on the way and ambulance is coming.
Yeah, ambulance come. They put me on C-spine because they're concerned about me not being able to feel my legs prior. I was taken to emerge. They cleaned the glass out of my wound. I had a lot of shrapnel into my arm. Once they checked me out, did all their scans, they released me, and Clayton Ennis was the acting sergeant at the time, so he came from Delta to come pick me up. And then on the way back, he received a phone call from management just trying to find out a bit about what was going on.
Right, and they were asking sort of about the collision, I gather, and trying to find out exactly what happened. Because at this point in time, you're working for the Integrated Gang Task Force, and that's sort of not under the Delta Police Department.
Yes. So like I said, it was my first day there. So Clay got a call from management. I guess it was all over the news that Night and 57th was shut down for quite a period of time involving some Delta police officers and Delta police vehicle. So management had called to ask Clay what was going on, who were the members involved. He advised that it was Jasmins and that he had actually just picked me up from the hospital, and I was sitting right there in the car with him.
And I know Clay was involved in actually the car that went down the ravine as well. Was he the acting sergeant that evening?
No, not on that evening.
Not on that evening,
No.
okay. So Clay picks you up from the hospital and you get this call. And are you worried that at this point in time you're going to lose your position in the gang task force? Are you thinking you're going to get hauled back to Delta?
You know what? I hadn't had any significant car accidents before. I just knew I was a lot of pain, but that was my concern, really. I mean, it was my very first day. I didn't even make it to my first shift. And my concern is however long this takes me to get better, I might lose my spot. I'm going to lose this opportunity. So I just kind of need to get better. Yeah.
It's funny you say that. You know, Aaron and I have had the pleasure of being able to do many of these podcasts. And in these times of crisis, typically, people often think about things that, you know, may not be relatively unimportant, but it's very important to them. And typically they're around the job. It's around getting back to work. It's about, you know, am I going to lose my job, rather than health and family and all those other important things. But I think that's a fairly typical response. Any comments around that, around sort of what you thought about the job at that time?
At that time, like I said, I wasn't aware of how this was going to impact me, but I was concerned for the opportunity. I think I was only maybe 2 years on the job, and I was given this shot. We only have one Delta representative at Uniform Gang Task Force or Violence Suppression Team. So my concern was if I'm out for a period of time, they just got to fill that spot, and then I don't know when I'll get, or if I will get another spot or a chance. So
as you're hearing from management, and management is actually you know checking in on the collision and who's involved, so they understand which person from Delta is involved. What are you thinking in relation to that? Are you hearing the sort of the supportive tone that you want to hear?
No, absolutely not. Really, it seemed like an informational, almost like a questionnaire. All right, so who's it? You know, what's going on? Kind of. It really seemed like they were concerned about whether or not there was an issue of liability. I didn't feel like at any time it was a concern of how I was feeling. I mean, I was physically the passenger in the car, and management spent the time talking to the driver of the car the whole time. You could have just asked how I was, you know, even just, hey, how are you feeling? That would have gone a long way. And it wasn't until I got home, Clay dropped me off at home, and when I got to my house, there was a voicemail there on my home phone, and it was from Inspector Ian Robinson from VPD. I'd never met him before. He was the one overseeing violence suppression team at the time. He had called around, got my phone number. He knew it was supposed to be my first day. He left a voicemail saying, hey, you haven't met me. My name is Inspector Robinson. I'm with VPD. I understand it was your first shift. Just want to let you know that our biggest concern is how you're doing, how you're feeling. You just take care of yourself. If you need anything, this is my personal number. And don't worry about it. Just get better. We'll hold your spot for you.
What did that mean to you? When you heard that?
It was huge. It put me at ease. It let me really feel like I could just focus on getting better, how I feel. I wasn't concerned about my job, my opportunities, etc. But it hit home that it was somebody who'd never met me before, and they're not even in this department. So yes. The fact that they kind of put that out there to reassure me, and I didn't feel like I got the same here when there was the opportunity to do so. So
tell me about your recovery. How long were you off? And
I took a week. I came back.
You wanted to get back really fast, right?
Yeah.
And why did you want to get back so fast?
I just want to make sure I had my spot.
That was the most important thing, was getting back and making sure that you could continue to do the work in the gang task force.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any long-term impacts from that collision?
Yeah, I've got kind of lifelong back injuries from that. I've had a number of subsequent collisions since then, but that was definitely the worst one. So since then, I've kind of had chronic back pain for the rest of my life.
So you spent how much time in the gang task force?
As a member of the uniform team, I spent about 6 months. So I went from August until January, early New Year. And then shortly after that, I came back and I went to the street crime unit.
So tell me a little bit about what the street crime unit does here in Delta.
At the time, back in 2009 when it was created, it was just 4 of us. So there was 2 vehicles, 4 people, and we really targeted prolific offenders, property offenders, drugs, firearms, that sort of thing.
With a small number of people like that, I guess you really can't do too much because you might have somebody off on training or someone sick. And
we were actually very effective. We were kicking doors every week, and we didn't have enough people to surveil. So you adapt and overcome. So we basically created a lot of informants, and all of our search warrants would be based on informants. So we were very productive.
Oh, that's good. Now, I know that when you were involved with our street crime unit as well, you were in a big collision that happened in Richmond, and that sort of builds on the story that you sort of just finished with us in relation to the accident that you had on your first day at CFSU.
Yeah. So we were working with the Richmond property crime team. Basically on Annacis Island, there's on the docks there's a bunch of new vehicles. There's hundreds of new vehicles. And let's say they didn't always secure the keys properly. So we had a problem with people stealing brand new cars. And they wouldn't even notice they were stolen because there's so many of them. So we had prolific offenders from Richmond that were involved in this. We'd identified them, identified where they were staying in Burnaby. We worked with Richmond Property Crime Unit to do surveillance of one of them. We were aware that he was a flight risk. A couple years prior, they had done a search warrant on his high-rise, and him, his partner, and a female tried to climb over the balcony, and the female fell and died, I think like 20 stories. So we were aware that he would go to extreme lengths to try and flee from police. We ended up following him to the Vancouver airport. I was riding with Clayton Ennis again. I was a passenger.
There's a theme here.
Yeah, it's usually when I'm with Clay. So I'm riding with Clay. The first surveillance car goes by. They see the stolen Ford Escape, pull over. The driver's the only occupant. Driver gets out and he starts walking towards the doors of the terminal. At that point, the Richmond NCO says that takedown's authorized, whoever's closest. So I hopped out of the passenger seat. I'm in plain clothes. We're in an unmarked police truck. And I went towards him. Him and I both made eye contact. I didn't have a chance to say anything as yet, but I don't know if he thought I was police or I was enemy of some sort, but he just decided to run. So he ran back towards the car. I yelled at him, identified myself as police. I caught up to him just as he entered the driver's seat of the SUV. And as I tried to pull him out, he just kept slamming the door on my head and my hand. Eventually, I got my hands around his neck, and he's a fair bit bigger than me. And I tried to pull him out of the car. At that point in time, he had the idea that it would be good to jam on the gas. So he just dragged me from the stolen car at the airport. We didn't go too far. I ended up pulling myself into the front seat. We were basically sharing the driver's seat. And I ended up choking him out. He lost consciousness. We crashed into a van that was parked there.
We call it DNR.
Oh no, this was just choked out. No, I'm doing what I'm going to do. Yeah, no, this was rear naked choke.
Yeah.
So, I absolutely feared for my life. I'm hanging off this car, and I ended up choking him out. We were very fortunate, even that the van was parked there. So I don't know if you know YVR, when you're on that upper level, there's really just a little bit of concrete and a guardrail. So if we hadn't, we would have gone straight through that and down. But luckily there was a van with some construction work going on. So we hit the van. I hit the dash and the windshield. I ended up letting go. He came back to consciousness and he started to reach down towards it's either a box cutter or bear spray. I don't know which one he was reaching for. So we ended up fighting again. Luckily, the other members of our surveillance team came, helped me get him out, and took him into custody.
Were you hurt during that?
Yeah, I banged my knee pretty good into the dash when we crashed, and just my head and my hand, but those weren't lasting. So
Is this less than a year than your other crash, would you say?
yeah, it was less than a year, or about a year, I guess.
So now you're making the second call back to Delta Police saying you're in Richmond now and involved in another crash.
Yeah, I think Clay was in charge of making that call again.
How did that go?
I don't remember that particular call, but I do know that there was some talk from management about us needing some supervision and being cowboys, that sort of thing. It was a bit of a concern for the incident at the airport that we may have caused and what we were doing out there.
That's right. So one of the things I think that we're learning from this in our other podcasts as well is that it's very important for any of your supervisors and management to be able to show that overt support. I think Dr. Stephen McGuire does some research on this, and he says that about 50% of police officers across Canada, out of 10,000 police officers he surveyed, said they didn't feel supported by their management, and there has to be overt actions to be able to say, we're concerned about your health and welfare. And by doing that, you reduce the trauma associated to many of these critical incidents much quicker than what you would normally do. Did you feel that support sort of?
No, to be honest with you, I felt like I was a liability until it was proven that I wasn't at fault or I hadn't done something wrong. It felt like nobody really wanted to ask what happened, even how I was doing, until we found out no, what you did was a good thing. You weren't at fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Now we can say, glad you're okay. But yes. I definitely didn't feel that support at the time.
What would have helped? As we learn about this and as we share this with other police officers and supervisors, what would have helped? What kind of conversation?
Even just a phone call or a text. Hey, how are you feeling? I heard you had something go on today. We don't need to talk about the incident, but I just want to make sure you're okay. That's what's important. Even things like what Inspector Robinson said to me. Just worry about getting better. Your job will be there when you get back. That would have been huge. But yeah, you always have those fears. So
absolutely. So now you obviously get back in a police car after these two incidents and you continue your career. And tell me a little bit about sort of how that unfolds now.
So that was in street crime unit for about a year and a half. And then after that, I went to CFSU as an investigator. I did a year at OCA in the organized crime side, working on large file. And then I went to 2 years at the gang task force side, working on the Bacon homicide and a couple of other Dope shootings, that sort of thing, gang-related files.
Now, you end up coming back to the Delta Police Department and going into our youth unit.
Yes.
And you begin some really great work there in youth unit and really made a difference in many of sort of our high-risk youth that we have within our community. So thank you for that work. And what ends up sort of happening there? I know that at one point in time, you're feeling a whole bunch of stress.
It was kind of a 24/7 job. I was taking phone calls after hours. I was taking them 24/7, getting calls in the middle of the night. I kind of had all of my top high-risk youth on CPIC entry. So anybody across Canada, if you stop them, detain them, give me a call so I can give you some advice as to what we should do. So I was getting a lot of phone calls, a lot of interrupted sleep. I was the only youth officer, and I was the first youth officer that we had, so I didn't really have any help. Around that time, we had a big change in supervision, I guess. We had lost a lot of sergeants, staff sergeants, and actually Dave Schaefer, who was an absolutely great sergeant, he got moved. So I was fulfilling the full-time acting sergeant role for vulnerable sector, so mental health and domestic violence, while taking on youth full-time as well, and going through a divorce. So that was great.
So obviously there's some building pressure there, and I know how available you were to the youth in your program, and I know that they called you, and many of them still call you now today, and you're seen as a mentor and a sort of a real leader to them. So it was critical. I would often go to community events, and they would talk about John Jasmins and the work he's doing in the community with our youth. So I definitely know you were having an impact there, but you were also wearing it personally, and you were also taking much of that on as a personal responsibility, almost like a father.
Yeah,
a big brother.
Because you care. When you care about what you're doing, you don't really think about yourself or the impact it's having on you. So it was probably about the fall of 2015 or so. I was showing up to work when I was brutally ill. I remember one time Hard saw me in the corner of the parking lot vomiting. And he said, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I got a meeting. I got to go to this meeting." He's like, "Go home." So you're just trying to do it all the time, and eventually you run yourself down. And it got to a point, I think it was the fall of 2015, that over the weekend I started having chest pain, bad chest pain, to the point where I couldn't fall asleep, and it was radiating into my shoulder. So what do you do? Like everybody else does, you Google it, and it doesn't look like a heart attack because it's the wrong shoulder. I tried calling my mom because she was a nurse, but unfortunately she was in Montreal. Her phone was off. So I figured, you know what, if it goes away, it'll be fine. So this is Saturday night. Sunday, I'm okay. I end up going to church with my kids and my wife, and I start having it again really badly. So it was about 10 to 15 minutes into church. I'm like, I got to go. So I left again, tasted some Tylenol, whatever, and it went away. So Monday morning rolls around and I'm driving my kids to school, and I started to have it a little bit, and I'd made an appointment to go see the doctor Monday morning, my family doctor, and my mom calls and she says, hey, what did you need? And I tell her, and she goes, it sounds like you're having a heart attack. Like, you need to go to the doctor now. So I go to the doctor and he says, yeah, it sounds like you're having a heart attack. Go to emergency. So my wife takes me to emergency. They walk me right through. They hook me up with an ECG and some scans and stuff. Luckily, it wasn't a heart attack. They don't know what it was. They found some other underlying issues that may or may not be related. But through the follow-up from that event and seeing a cardiologist, they did an echocardiogram and they located an aneurysm on my aortic root, which needed to be monitored, and eventually led to open heart surgery.
So how long was it between the time you were diagnosed and the time you had surgery?
It was about a year, just over a year and a half or so.
And you had to work through that.
So when I was first diagnosed with it, the way they explain is that your aortic root, the diameter is supposed to be 25 to 35 millimeters. Mine was 47. So they explain it kind of like a water balloon. I didn't really understand what that meant. They said when it hits 50 millimeters, you have surgery, and they remove that, and they have some options they can do. I asked the cardiologist, what does this mean? Like, if it causes a problem, do I get chest pain? Do I go to emergency? He goes, no, you just die. Oh. He goes, it will
comforting.
Yeah. He's like, it'll rupture and you'll bleed out. The odds of you surviving that are like not very good. So I'm sitting there going, okay, so this might happen any day now, and I have to wait. I'm at 47. I need to hit 50 before they do surgery. And he goes, you know what? You'll be fine. He goes, where it is, he goes, you'll be 50 or 60 before you need surgery. He goes, I'll be long retired. You'll be fine. He goes, and we'll check this every year. We'll do a scan to see where it's at. So an entire year, I had to sit there going, is it going to rupture?
So are you working out during that time? I know you're a hard charger.
I asked the cardiologist, which I found out he's not a very good cardiologist, if I could still work out, like I play football on the weekends, stuff like that. He goes, oh yeah, it's fine. As long as your heart rate comes down. And if you have high blood pressure, we might have to put you on some meds. So I was lifting heavy weights. I was playing football. I was doing everything I was doing normally. And apparently that was not the thing to do. 1 year goes by, they do another scan, and where I'd been 47 before and 50 is the mark for surgery, I was now at 54. So I'd progressed where I'm supposed to be 60 years old before this gets to this point. This had taken 1 year, and it was now past the point normally of surgery. I end up having some disagreements. My cardiologist still didn't think I needed surgery. So him and I had it out. I'm like, can you just send me to a surgeon, just to check? And he goes, no surgeon will touch you at this point because of where it is. It's at the base. You'll be fine. And I couldn't live with that. Luckily, my family doctor owns the clinic where the cardiologist was. So I literally walked down the hallway to my family doctor. He's been my doctor for 20 years. He's amazing. And I told him what my concerns are. He goes, let me go talk to him. So he goes down and they have it out a bit. And he goes, the cardiologist said he will send you to a surgeon just to get a consult if it'll make you feel better. So I'm like, okay. So if a surgeon says it's fine, then it's fine. I get a call about 3 days later. The doctor would like to see you. So I come in, sit down with my family doctor. He goes, wait a minute, cardiologist wants to come talk to you too. So I spoke to the surgeon and they're going to do the surgery on you. I'm like, he goes, oh, it's preventative at this point. It's still nothing to worry about. So I end up seeing the surgeon. The surgeon's like, no, this is not preventative. You need surgery. They gave me 3 options as to what I could do for surgery. The first would be putting in a mechanical valve, which would probably last the rest of my life. But the problem is that I'd have to be on warfarin, blood thinner, significant blood thinner, and it would basically end my operational career as a police officer.
I think warfarin's a rat poison. Yeah, it's awful stuff.
As soon as I heard about that option, that wasn't an option for me. I mean, I got a lot more years left in the job. Again, it comes back to, not whether or not my job would still be there. That is obviously part of it if I'm not operational, but what quality of life and what can I feel I can contribute. So the other option was to do a tissue valve. But the concern with that is that being young and being active, if you get a tissue valve, you'll burn it out in about 7 years and you'll have to have the surgery again. The third option, they call it a boutique surgery. There's only a couple surgeons in BC that do it. My surgeon being one of them. They referred me to somebody else. And basically it's called the David technique. So what they do is they try and save your actual valve. and they remove the aneurysm. So they excise the aneurysm and they sew in fabric instead of tissue. So it says Dacron fabric. So I asked the surgeon, how many times have you done this? And he's done this 12. Well, how many have failed? 2. We asked some pretty pointed questions about fatalities. My kids were often with me during the discussions, and we try and talk in higher level, but my kids apparently know what fatality means. So they picked up on the percentages. So that was obviously concerning. But again, when I had to make the choices of, mechanical valve would be the safe bet, but it would end my career and impact my quality of life for me, that wasn't an option. So I decided to take the David technique.
So boutique, it sounds like it's got cachet and sounds really good, but I'm sure there's lots of downsides to it as well that, create anxiety for you in preparation of this operation.
Yeah. I mean, when you're told mathematical percentage of you may not wake up from the surgery, it's not something you think about. I mean, being in a risky job, relatively speaking, I mean, something could happen, but it's not something you know a date or a time. So basically, as the day approached, you kind of try and spend as much time with your kids as you can. You try and just in case.
So really what I want to sort of hone in on before I sort of bring you to your current incident is the fact that organizational stress typically is cumulative, and we all carry this backpack with us, and this backpack is full of big rocks from the car crashes we go to and all these incidents of trauma where the big rock goes in, and we have CISM teams and peer support and all kinds of things to help us get the big rocks out. But the organizational stress, sort of not seeing any support, the stress of overwork, the stress of whether or not you have your job, a promotion process, a posting process, all those things put gravel and sand into your backpack, and those are harder to get out. And by now, your backpack's getting full.
Yeah.
And you go through your surgery, and let's talk about the outcome of your surgery, and then I'll bring you sort of out to your latest incident.
Outcome of the surgery, so it was successful. Unfortunately, it was supposed to be 4 hours, but it ended up being 6. There was an unexpected arterial bleed, and I lost half my blood, had multiple transfusions, but it was ultimately successful, but took a long time to recover, about 5 months total. So
you have some Dacron in your heart right now.
Yes, I have some fabric in there.
Wow.
So
That's
bionic.
Yeah, you are a little bit bionic, and certainly, it hasn't stumbled in your career at all and sort of what you do. In relation to your recovery time, how long was it?
It was 5 months before I was able to return back to work, but the shape I was in when I got back to work, I was 29 pounds heavier than when I started. I had pneumonia. You can't lift more than 5 pounds for 12 weeks. So it takes a bit of a toll on you. So
Yes.
It took me a long time to get back to feeling normal again.
Tell me what you did during that time just to try and stay resilient.
Being off for the 5 months, I was miserable. Like it was,
Here's the truth.
It is. Like, to be honest with you, you get to a point where, I had a newborn daughter. She's only like 3-4 months. I can't lift her up. I can't play with her. I can barely, sleep. So basically you do what you got to do. A lot of fast food, a lot of comfort food. You just try and get through, and you kind of count off the doctor's appointments till you can actually do something. And then to be honest with you, being able to work out again, eating healthy, I turned to eating very, very clean, very kind of rigid in that way. And then even being back to work was nice change of scenery from my house.
What's interesting is you're saying the same thing, I think, in a different way that Ray Atwell said, who also had his wife had heart surgery. But all you think about is the next thing. You don't think too far ahead. It's always just the next thing. How do I get to the next doctor's appointment? How do I get to the next week, the next month?
Yeah.
By not concentrating too far ahead, you keep yourself somewhat focused. So let's talk about what's happened to you recently. And as I mentioned earlier, you are a hard charger and a good investigator and never shy of being able to jump in. So tell me a little bit about going to pick up your kids at school one day.
So I guess it was Wednesday, February 20th. I just finished my shift here. I went to go pick up my kids at their school. As I was walking back with them to my vehicle, I became aware of an incident that had occurred. As I ran towards the sound of the incident, I observed an altercation where a male was assaulting a female with a knife. Made the decision to intervene. I was stabbed a number of times while intervening, and luckily I was able to disarm the male and hold him until uniformed members came.
Absolutely. And this has been widely reported. The case is still being investigated, so we won't go into the details at this podcast, and hopefully we can get you back for another one down the road when this incident is all over. But what I want to talk about is that, number one, you were off duty. You had no equipment with you. You were in plain clothes. You were picking up your kids. Your kids are walking out or already outside of the school, walking towards you. You jump in and now you find yourself stabbed.
Yeah.
And do you know how bad it is?
I didn't at the time until, like I said, after I handed off the mail to the uniformed officers, my first thoughts were my kids. So I started to walk back. I hadn't said anything to them. I just ran. So we literally were walking, the three of us, and I just ran to this incident. So I looked up and I saw them there, and they're just white as ghosts. So I put my hand inside my jacket, and I could feel like it was just absolutely soaking wet, and I didn't want them to see it. This time officers had attended and they were trying to get me to tend to my injuries, but I didn't want my kids to see me like that. Luckily there was a teacher and a friend of mine who like, what can we do? And I said, take the kids inside. So they took Dante and Brooklyn into the office, and I think they took them into the music room. So as soon as they were out of view, I felt better. So I felt comfortable taking off my jacket, and my sweater was soaked. Politi was trying to get me to lay down so she could tend to the injuries. And then my next thought was my wife and my kids. So I decided just give me a sec, and I pulled out my phone and I'm trying to call my wife to tell her what happened, because all I can think of is if she sees this on the news, she's going to lose her mind.
And your wife's a police officer?
She's a police officer as well. She
Yes.
was on duty at time in Surrey in major crime there. And we had that conversation afterwards. Hearing it from me and hearing my voice helped her immensely instead of hearing it from somebody else, because the fact that she could hear my voice made her feel like it wasn't as bad as it was. So yeah, I tried to unlock my phone. My hands were wet. I eventually call her. It goes to her voicemail. She calls back and I answer. And the only words I got out were, I've been stabbed, but I'm okay. I need you to come to the kids' school now and pick them up. And I hung up. At least I thought I had hung up, but because I had been calling her originally, there's about a 2.5 minute voicemail on her phone that she still hasn't deleted yet.
Oh my goodness.
Listening to them trying to fix me. So luckily I had some great officers. I had Pleady there and I had Garth. I mean, if anything happens to you, you want Garth to be there. So yeah, they started, patched me up, got me loaded into the ambulance, and then got me to the hospital.
Do you remember the ride to the ambulance or at the hospital? What are your memories there?
You know what? Your mind focuses on stupid things that don't mean anything. Even on laying on the ground, I had some vivid images of what was going on around, but I was very upset about my shirt and my jacket. Yeah, it was a really nice winter jacket that I liked. I still can't replace it. So I was mad about the holes. I was concerned about my phones. Like I had 2 phones. I'm like, I knew I needed my phone when I got to the hospital, so I had to make sure I had my phone. In the ambulance, there was like 4 paramedics in there. There's 2 supervisors, 2 regular paramedics, Garth sitting above me, and I just kept asking him to call my wife. He wouldn't let me. He said, Schultz will take care of that. And then, he just kind of focused on things. They were trying to check. They'd seen the 3 stab wounds on my left side, around my ribs and my hip, but they were trying to check my legs, and they couldn't undo my belt, so they were going to cut it. So I didn't want them to cut it, so I said, I'll undo my own pants. So we had that argument, and just trying to save my clothes. These are not uniform, right? These are my own clothes. So.
Cops are cheap.
Yeah. So
if it was duty gear, we wouldn't care.
Yeah,
Throw it
exactly.
away.
Yeah.
But if it's our own stuff.
Down to purchase and get us a new one.
So, so I remember that. I remember the ride. They said they were going to give me something for the pain. I asked if I could have hydromorph, and they looked at me strangely. But I already knew that from my heart surgery the year previously, what I like and what I don't like. So
I don't even know what hydromorph is, but it sounds good.
Yeah. So they gave me like, okay, we'll give you some hydromorph, and then they got me to the hospital and wheeled me into trauma there.
I remember you fighting with the nurses at one point, not fighting, but discussing with the nurses at one point in time. They wanted to sort of get a better look at you, and you're on your phone. And tell me about that.
The fight that I had with the nurses was, actually, it was the surgeon. When I got there, I still wasn't in a lot of pain. Like you're wincing, like you're uncomfortable, but you really haven't thought of like, oh, I might die. Like you're just kind of, where's my wife? Is she here yet? Like that sort of thing. You're focused on different things that maybe are not as important, but they're important to you. I didn't feel terrible until they sat me up. So they said they had to sit me up for an x-ray. And at that point, I was in excruciating pain. I felt like I was going to vomit and I was going to black out. And I guess because I'd lost so much blood when they sat me up, there's a lack of blood pressure. And I'm going to pass out. I'm going to be sick. Put me down. Like I was yelling at them at that point. I'm going to die. So eventually they put me down, and then they were going to wheel me off to a CT scan because they wanted to see where the injuries were inside before they did surgery. But even that, like the stupid ideas that you have, they're wheeling me down the hallway, and I remember looking up and I saw the time and it was 4:07. And I asked them, I go, is it really 4:07? They're like, yeah, maybe. Why? I'm like, oh, I've got class at 4. I didn't tell the instructor I won't be there. They're like, nobody cares about your class,
yeah, that's right.
but the things that are important to you, right?
Agreed.
So they brought me back. They talked about I had lost a lot of blood, so they put me on some transfusions. Even that, I joked, my sister's going to love this. My sister works for Canadian Blood Services. And after I'd had my heart surgery, one of the first things when I recovered, she goes, oh, I heard you had a lot of blood transfusions. I go, yeah. She goes, you owe us now. You got to be our spokesperson. So I did that last year. And so I was saying that to the surgeon. I go, my sister's going to make me do this again. And when
you will be the poster boy.
Yeah. So yeah, sure enough, she goes, oh yeah, definitely. So, so you think about all those things. And once my wife got there, I wanted to know how my kids were doing. So she told me they were quite upset. Her staff sergeant had driven her code to scene. They actually got there while I was being loaded into the ambulance, but she couldn't get through to talk to me, and they needed to get me to the hospital, so they couldn't stop the ambulance. She told me how they're doing. They're quite upset, but for me, they were still trying to get me in the surgery, and I insisted on calling the kids. So I called them. I wanted them to hear my voice, and my daughter's, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I just got a couple of cuts, which technically is true, just not the extent of it. But again, once both of them heard my voice, that put them at ease. So, yes. And then they wheeled me into surgery.
So you undergo surgery. Everything is, obviously you've recovered. You were let. I remember going to the hospital to see you on Friday, I think it was. So this is 2 days after the event, and they're telling you that once you can stand up, once you can lift this, once you can walk, we'll let you out. And you weren't supposed to be able to do that for a week, and like you did in 3 days, and they said, let me out of here.
Having the hospital stay a year and a half previous, I learned what I need to do to get out. So, once you stop hitting the button for morphine, they feel that you can manage your pain. So I stopped cold turkey after the first day and a half. Once you're able to walk around, they kind of monitor how much you walk around. But I know if you do it during the day, they don't notice you because it's busy. So I would get up at 5 a.m. and I would do laps. And I did 13. The day I got out, I did 13 because all the nurses are just behind the desk. So they can see you. They're like, he's going, oh, he's fine. He's not taking meds. So they let me out in just under 72 hours. So I just knew I'd do better at home.
Now, and you are recovering, and you'll make a full recovery, and you're well on the path there. And I know you're back in the gym and eating well, and you look great. So that's wonderful. So I want to sort of, as we bring sort of this to a conclusion, I want to talk about some of your strategies of how, what helped you. Number one, what helped you from the organization to be overcome some of these incidents, and what you did to be able to make sure that you stayed in the right mind frame and actually were able to, continue to get as healthy as you are.
The support from the management and from my fellow police officers and civilians, that was overwhelming. I must have seen 20 different officers, including all members of management, even before I went into surgery. I just remember, because I'm laying on the table, people coming and going. I had visitors sometimes like 13 hours a day. Sometimes I'd have like 6, 7.
Give me some
people.
Spare time.
It passed the time. So it was nice to see. The support was big. It was overwhelming, but really for me, it's, this is 2 incidents in a year and a half where I could have died. Yes. You kind of prioritize. So I'm thankful. I feel fortunate. But for me, for the early days was really focusing on the victim. So not myself, but the Mrs. George. So I managed to see her while I was in hospital. I physically needed to see that she was okay. And I managed to see her a few times. So knowing that she was alive, knowing that she was recovering, that was very important to me. Again, it's a matter of controlling what you can. In the early days, I physically wasn't able to do anything for myself. I can't work out. I can't do much of what I would normally do to recover when I'm under stress. So making sure everybody else is okay, making sure my kids are okay, making sure the school was okay. I had a couple of visits with the school. I addressed all the parents there at a meeting, wrote a letter to the students, that sort of thing. So trying to take care of everybody else that was affected by this. And then I felt afterwards that I kind of take care of what I needed to do for myself.
No, that's perfect. I want to build on something. It's clear that you see yourself sort of as a healer. You're taking care of your kids. You're taking care of your wife. You want to make sure they're okay. You want to make sure the victim is okay. You want everything around you to be okay because that's your role. And when that's okay, then you can concentrate on yourself and get yourself better as well. And I want to turn it over to Aaron because Aaron had talked a little bit about sort of the attitude and him making a conscious choice at one point in time around, you will actually not become the victim anymore. You become the victor. And talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's almost like it's a negative energy, right? You just spend so much time feeling sorry for yourself and you're really not improving and just moving forward. It's almost like a slippery slope. You're going down, down, down. At some point, I don't know whether you hit the bottom or whatever that looks like, but for me, it was, I just stopped, took a hard look at myself and just said, stop being a victim here and fix what I can fix and everything else will follow and just kind of move forward. Absolutely.
For me, that's definitely what happened to me after my heart surgery. Like I said, it went down to me being massively overweight, super unhealthy. Why did this happen to me? That sort of thing. But the lessons I learned was from that one. So this time it wasn't going to be that way. I'm going to get out of hospital as fast as I can. I'm going to get healthy as fast as I can. I'm going to be in the gym. So I wasn't going to allow myself this time to kind of devolve down into that victim mentality.
It's funny how trauma can actually be transformative. If you take the right approach and at the right attitude and recognize that it takes practice and discipline, you can actually find opportunity in those experiences. And that's really where the gold is. So before we wrap up, anything else you want to sort of provide to us on this podcast that you can share that your experiences over the course of your career?
Really just be safe, take care of each other out there, and don't take things for granted. I've been very fortunate. We laugh that I have 9 lives. My wife, I used to tell her all the time when I'd go out on night shifts or wherever I'd be, that I was bulletproof. But the joke is now apparently I'm not stab proof. Just don't take things for granted. So, the job is a very important job. I take it obviously very seriously to protect people, to take care of each other. But focus on family. Focus on the things that are important. Don't take it for granted. And
like your clothes?
Yeah, well, that jacket still can't be replaced. That's still important.
Yeah. I was just doing the math. I think you're down to 7 lives actually now.
Apparently. So I got lots left.
I got a question for you.
Sure.
How many pictures have you gotten in the last few months from kids with you actually wearing a cape?
Yeah, that's exactly right. As a hero.
I've gotten some handwritten cards. I get a lot of people checking on me when I pick up my kids from school. Little kids coming up, shake my hand, parents, that sort of thing. So, the support from the department, the community, even across Canada has been really, really overwhelming.
John, Aaron, thank you again so much for all the work that you do to be able to come here and be able to share your experiences with us and to help us learn. And every single one of these, I take away something, right? There's absolutely gold, and every time we do it, we mine it, we find it, and then we have to make sure that we share it with other people. And hopefully other people can learn from your experiences. So appreciate you being here at the table again.
Thank you.
Done. These productions never come without a lot of work from everyone involved. A big shout out and thank you to Constable Aaron Hill, Melissa Granum, and Nikki Hewitt for producing and recording, and of course post-production done by Podfly. Next week on Bend, Don't Break.
He had a drywall saw, like a 10-inch drywall saw, down the back of his pants or somewhere behind him, and he came back and he thrust the drywall saw like into my chest, and it hit the trauma plate and the book in the notebook area, and it bent the drywall saw, which was thank goodness, right?
For more episodes, you can find us on iTunes and Google Play. If you have a story to tell, go to deltapolice.ca/podcast to submit your idea. Don't forget to subscribe to and rate our podcast. And if you want to connect, we're on all major social media platforms. Once again, thanks for tuning in.